sometimes it's just about having the conversation with another divorced woman to understand that what you were feeling was completely normal. The fear, the uncertainty, the nervous system going haywire. Well, today's guest is going to help you feel exactly that way. So let's get started. Welcome to the Crazy Ex-Wives Club, a podcast dedicated to helping women navigate the emotional journey that is divorce. I'm your host, Erica, and if you're trying to figure out life after the big D, welcome to the club. Whether you're contemplating divorce or dealing with the aftermath or any of the many phases in between, the club has got you covered. Each week, you'll hear stories from women who have been in your shoes. This isn't about spilling tea on divorce details. This is about giving you the tools to take control of your own healing journey. Listen in weekly for advice, tips, and tools to help you move through each stage of the process. Welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Ex-Wives Club. I'm your host, Erica, and today I have Rachel Sobel with us. So Rachel is an award-winning writer, an author, a speaker, a do-over wife, a mom of two girls, a short order cook, laundress, lunch packer, boo-boo kisser, and chauffeur. How many of you can relate to that list? I think we have all been there or are doing that. So welcome, Rachel. I'm excited to have you on the show.
I'm excited to be here. And you know what? I am crushing it on the other side. I'm going to own that. Some people say that and then I don't take compliments, but you are right. I am crushing it. I'm going to
Yes.
manifest more of that energy for myself.
Oh my gosh, right? 2024. What do you want to call in, right? I was actually talking to a friend because we spend so much time looking ahead of what else we want to do that we never take enough time to just reflect on what have we done? What have you gotten through? What have you survived? Because in the moment, we're in survival mode. In the moment, we are just getting through and we don't know how we're going to do it. This is a common theme. Everybody's like, I don't know how I was going to restart. I don't know how I was going to get to the other side. And all of a sudden, I was there. So I think that's such a powerful place to really start in your own successful transformation to the other side.
Yeah, I think that it's that fear that keeps people from exiting a marriage or a relationship, right? Because they're so scared. A lot of us are afraid of change and the unknown, and you're essentially blowing up your life. I mean, you really are. You're going to have to share custody of your kids. You're going to have to probably, change your home situation. There's a lot of dynamics that change. And the longer you've been married, I think the harder that is to even think about leaving. And so I think it's that fear that paralyzes us from making the decision. And yes, you're right. You're in that like survival mode, that fight or flight mode. I always tell people that when I was going through my divorce, I was a shell of myself. I was not functioning on all cylinders. And you kind of just like make it through each day until you wake up one day and you are on the other side and you're a little more present and you're a little more yourself and you found your voice a little bit more. And it's different for everyone. Everyone's process is different.
And I think that it's a good thing, to be honest, that we're a little afraid to go do it. It shouldn't be an easy decision, right? Nobody got
No.
married because they want to get divorced. And so
Mhm.
choosing, because you are about to blow up every structure and system you have, every holiday ritual, right? Your support
Mhm.
systems. Who do you go to? I remember getting on a plane for the first time and being like, I don't know who to text to say, like, we're boarded. I'll text you when I land so that somebody knows that I'm still alive, when you're I had to
Mhm.
travel for work solo a lot, like, those pieces were gone, and so it should be something that you take seriously, but it shouldn't be something that keeps you stuck longer than you need to be.
No, and I think that also when you're going through the divorce process, things become very mechanical, right? Because there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of logistics, there's court, there's lawyers, there's all these things. And so I think you get caught up in the minutia of that. And like you just have to be able to be sane and lucid enough to get through all of that. But you're not thinking about the ramifications. Like one of the examples I've written about many times is you just brought up holidays. I could not celebrate Thanksgiving for the first several years on Thanksgiving if it was a year I didn't have my daughter. I couldn't do it because I felt like I was being a bad mother by celebrating without my whole family. And so we changed things. We started celebrating on the years I didn't have her on Saturday because it's just a day and who cares? And that for me made me feel better. But I think when you're hashing everything out and you're dividing everything, including the time with your child, You cannot possibly imagine what that feels like until you're living it. And then that's also when that second set of emotions starts to bubble up because you're like, oh God, did I make a mistake? Did I, should I have done this? And I think it's very easy to question yourself. And I actually think sometimes it's more normal to question yourself than not because it was the first part of your life, however long it lasted. And now you're figuring out a new normal.
Yeah, there is the business of divorce and there is the emotions of divorce, and so often we only look at the business side. Erica,
Hmm.
how do I hire a lawyer? Do I have to pay alimony? What's gonna happen in my life? Okay, so the
Hmm.
we're over here talking about the emotions. There are really great, talented people out in the world that can help you figure out the business, but we think that's the only part about divorce. We think that, okay, well, once we divide the assets and once we commit to our parenting plan and once we figure out, how we're gonna sell the house, okay, great, it's
Hmm.
done. Put it put a stamp of approval on it and file it away in the filing cabinet, and that's not how it works because so often that is the phase that we are just getting through until you get to the other side, and now you have to live with that choice.
Totally. And I think that we get so caught up in that, that we live in this like weird limbo where we're trying to figure out who we are without being a wife for the first time and who we are being a single mother. And all those different roles have kind of shifted and changed. And I think that one of the things that I wish someone had told me when I was about to embark on divorce, just so that my expectations were clear, is that divorce isn't over when you get divorced if you share a child, right? It's not over. Yes, you being married to that person is over, but all of the history you have and the buttons that get pushed and like all of these things now exist in a very different way because you're no longer married to that person, but you still have to coexist with them as a parent. And that looks different for everyone. But I think that I was under the impression, like many people, that when you sign the papers and you go to court and you get that stamp and you're divorced, that like you can breathe and you're done. And that is not true. It's just not. I know people don't want to hear that, but it's not true.
Right? This is the truth bomb episode, but it's so important because can you do it? Yes, lots of people have. And, Rachel and I are sitting here telling you that divorce was the right option for us. And it
Mhm,
had a lot of hurdles after the paperwork was filed. And we will continue to have to parent with our exes,
mhm.
our kids, even after they're grown up. You got grandkids, you got weddings, you got other things
Yeah.
that come up. So it's being able to understand your own emotions because when you're divorced, you can no longer control the other person. You have less influence over the other person. You can
Mhm,
only control and influence yourself. And so, learning how to have the support system and the healing modalities and the ability to work through it because it doesn't just end, it becomes a part of your next chapter. But one of the topics you and I had talked about was it's really important to not let it define you.
mhm. Not let it define you and also not compare yourself to other people going through the journey, whether it's
Mhm.
friends or people in your network, family, or even people that you see on social media who you follow who are being open about their own experience. It's not a cookie cutter thing, right? So it doesn't define us and it's not the same for everyone. And those two things I think we have to keep in mind every step of the process. It is absolutely always going to be a part of my story. I am divorced. I have a child from a divorce. So all of those things are never going to go away. Even when my child is 30, I'm still divorced from her father, right? So I think that it's easy to get caught up in making a very significant part of your life your whole personality. Right. When we're going through a breakup or we're getting married or all these milestones in our lives, or when you have kids, everything seems to revolve around that. Every conversation, every part of your day. And I think that we have to give ourselves grace and remind ourselves that divorce is always going to be part of our story and there may be hard days for the rest of our lives, but it is not who we are. It's not. Even if you don't go on to get remarried or and you stay single for the rest of your life, you don't need another person in your life to get rid of the divorce dynamic, right? You can do it all on your own and stay single and be happy and wonderful, live your best life, but we have to be very careful to not live in that bucket where everything in our life revolves around that divorce and it becomes like a ongoing pity party for ourselves.
Well, because it does just that. This pity party, this victim mode, this constant
Mhm.
blaming, you turn your power over to somebody else or something else. And then you're at the mercy of how you want to allow it to continue to affect your life. But it's a
Mhm.
choice that you made. And so then, therefore, there are choices to let it go and reflect.
Yeah.
I was
And that's not
years.
easy.
No, it
That's not
because
easy to do. I know everyone, again, handles things differently. For me, getting out of that habit of divorce being the thing that kind of loomed over me took therapy, because even if you think that you are over any of the situations that are tied to you emotionally because of the divorce, sometimes you don't even realize you're not truly over them, right? You could be moved on. I have a whole new husband and a whole new life, and we've been married for a decade next in April. We will be married for 10 years, together for 13. So, I've been out of that a very long time, but I had to have some very important self introspection with myself and my therapist to figure out there were things that I hadn't healed from. And it's not until you heal from those things that could be a lifelong thing that you really start to kind of feel comfortable in your own skin post divorce and stop getting caught in the yuckiness of how it feels. And also, let's be real, nobody wants to hear about it all the time. Like, it's hard enough when you have friends who are supporting you through it, but like when you're out of it, nobody wants to be around you if you're constantly lamenting about divorce. At some point, you got to like pick yourself up, get back on the horse, and move on and put that behind you and not forget it. It's a part of your story, but it does not have to be the main part of your story.
Yeah, I feel like this is where I'm supposed to make that shameless plug for the divorce community that I run because you guys, that was the whole point. Our friends are not always the right people to give us advice. They are doing their best, but they also are not in it and they don't understand how long we kind of do get stuck in the same spiral and the indecision and the having to talk it over. And so being able to join the club and get into that community where you have other women who understand what you're going through and understand that there's a balance. There's a balance of holding space and processing the emotions. And then there comes a day when I'm going to ask you and say, are you ready to let it go? Are you ready to put it down? Because you don't have to carry this anymore. It's part of who you are, but it was the thing that transformed you into something more. It's the thing that showed you who you could really be, right? It's not a thing that happened to you. It was in service to where you were meant to go to.
Totally. And I remember personally having so many conversations with friends and support. And again, my therapist, and I know I talk about it a lot, but I'm like a therapy super fan. I mistook so many things that I recalled from going through a divorce as weakness, right? Not leaving when I probably should have, and hanging on and trying to make it not be my life because I was so scared to be a single mom and start over. And maybe I didn't want to be with someone. And I would just be, I didn't know what I wanted. And I think that when we stop getting caught up in all of the what ifs and the regret that we might feel and all those things, and we genuinely kind of accept the decision and where we are and we start to process it, I think it makes it make more sense to you. And I think that just because you go through a divorce and you're unhappy doesn't mean you're going to be unhappy the rest of your life. And it doesn't mean that it's going to mar you and like nobody's going to want you if you do choose to move on. And I also think the co parenting thing in general, I think there's so many preconceived notions about what that's supposed to look like. And I think, especially with social media, you and I talked about this too. There are so many people out there flaunting how incredible their relationship is with their co-parent, and they're going on vacation, they're doing all those things. And that is amazing. I really, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. That is amazing. And I think there's part of every divorced person who wishes they could have that level of amicability just to make it easier. But the truth is that the more women I talk to, for the overwhelming majority, that is not reality. And I think that those of us who don't have that start to feel pressured on the other side of divorce that we're doing something wrong because we don't have it. And I just want women to know that if you don't get along with your co parent, you're not doing anything wrong necessarily. I mean, if you're starting stuff all the time, maybe you're contributing to it. It takes two people to have a functional relationship. And sometimes that's just not a reality. And it's okay. It is okay to accept that and move forward, whatever that looks like. And maybe you're parallel parenting and not co parenting, whatever it is. But we can't judge ourselves for what that relationship looks like when we move on, when we get remarried, if we stay single and we're on that other side of divorce, because it's going to change for the rest of our lives. It's going to ebb and flow what that looks like. And if we put too much pressure on ourselves to have what it's supposed to be, you're never going to realize what your truth is and what it's supposed to be for you. And that's different for everyone. And I think it's so important.
The piece is that when we decide that this is the way we think it needs to be, there are 2
Mhm.
people in this. There are 2 people that are
Yes.
co-creating, and when you make the decision, this is how it's gonna be. You know what happens? You show up starting to expect the other person to act the way that you've decided they need to be, and they're not going to, especially not in
Right.
the beginning, and so then what happens? Now you're going after them in, "Well, why aren't you doing this?" And this is what was best for our kid. I too wanted that. It took 2 years to get to the divorce. Okay, so it was a very long separation before I was like, "You know what? This is not meant to be a forever story.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
meant to be a chapter." And we have a great kid, and our kid, family's really important to him. We're a big extended family that looks different. And so I
Mhm.
set out with that intent without really ever asking him if he wanted that intent or if his new fiance wanted that intent. And so when
Mhm.
he didn't act the way that I felt he should have, if that was our goal, it showed up in how I texted him, in how I talked to him, in how, more importantly, how frustrated I became when he didn't behave the way that I felt he should be. And that was a
Mhm.
whole nother lesson of control that I needed to let go. I needed to let go of trying to control what my co-parenting story looked like to allow it to be what both of us were creating. I know
Mhm.
what I'm creating on my side. The door is open. He is invited. We openly communicate key dates. Hey, had a meeting at the school for our son. This is what we were talking about. He is always included. Whether or not he chooses to do the same, it's his business.
Yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
to try and still control that.
No, and it's hard to control it, and it takes a lot of wasted energy because you cannot be responsible for someone else's actions and feelings and behaviors. You have to really focus on yourself and how you carry yourself and how everyone plays a role. Everyone plays a role in any kind of, human interaction dynamic. So, what you said before, talking about the business side of divorce, I think that's where this comes in. And it's my current husband, current and final husband, that reminds me of this all the time. Less now because I'm a little more removed from it, but especially in the beginning when those texts could get heated and all of that stuff, he would look at me and say, "You have to remove emotion, as hard as that is, and you have to treat it like a business transaction, literally, whether you're talking about where you're, trading the child or where you're celebrating, whatever it is, it should be unemotional, facts only." And that's really hard to do when you have history with someone, right? It is. It is. That's human nature.
Yeah, and when there's a kid in the middle, right? Because what you're advocating for
Totally.
is not because you need it. You're doing it because
Mhm.
you have a child who's also hurting, who's also grieving, who's also going through things, and you're just trying to make things easier for them.
It's very true, and I think that it's another truth about divorce that people are a little bit quiet about, not because it's a secret, but I think no one really thinks to discuss it, and there's just so many different layers to it that make it what it is, and it's subjective. This is not something where you can write a guide for how you should handle things because every personality is different, every kid is different, every supporting family is different, and like I said before, there are going to be good days and bad days, and my hope for everyone is they have more good days, but you are in control of that more than you think when it comes to the communication, how you carry yourself. And I think that when you're with someone for a long time, those triggers don't go away so quickly. I am, again, like I said, more than a decade out, and I still have very obvious triggers that
Mhm.
I have to talk myself off a ledge sometimes because they still hit me as if it's fresh. And
Yeah.
that's something I wasn't prepared for. I thought that when my marriage was over and I moved on and everything was healthier and I got my bearings again, that there was nothing that would trigger me and that I'm going to be vulnerable. That could not be further than truth. It's just not. When you have all of this emotion and history with someone that nobody else can understand, no matter how much you explain it, and you share a child, it's like the perfect storm for things to really go awry if you don't kind of keep your finger on that button to control things on your
Yeah.
end.
I always remind myself in any interaction, right? Because why do we allow ourselves to treat our partners or speak to our partners in ways that we would never speak to a coworker? So I always think about when I'm looking at that communication, this is a business interaction. How would I speak to a coworker? So clear boundaries, sticking to the facts, not over explaining, not putting a lot of emotion into it. And then the other piece is I always use the marker of asking myself, would I be proud if my son saw me acting this way? And that stopped me from sending a lot of text messages because they were big old rants. So before I could get to is this how I'd speak to a coworker? The question was, would I be proud to be the person behind what I'm about to send? And if the answer was no, then I would just write it in a journal app and send it there without actually texting it. But the other piece that you said about the triggers, I mean, even the irony, even last night, I was up late processing a trigger that had nothing to do with the current relationship, but everything was being brought up from the past. And so this is where I cannot stress enough having the support system, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a divorce coach, whether that's a mentor, having a professional to help you get through it is so important. I did a ton of books. I did talk therapy on and off, but I did a ton of books. I did EFT, I did EMDR. So when these triggers hit, I know they're hitting. And I know it's not real because all of a sudden my physical body is flooded with a sensation. Like last night, it was like really bad cold chills, like your skin gets
Mhm.
all icy,
Yep,
prickly.
that from the I know exact from the top of your head to the bottom, you get that, like,
Yeah, it's like,
shiver, that cold, like yes. Oh god. It's
and
the worst. It is the worst.
it is the worst. And it hit, and I was like, huh. But because I've done the work, I sat there last night and I said, oh, old you would be so deep in this hole right now. Old you wouldn't even have been able to notice that this was an old thing that was coming up. How interesting is it to be the new you that's sitting and reflecting almost like this is a parallel version of you? And from there,
Yeah.
then I could use those physical sensations. I could look at them. I found the one of the huge fights we had. I was super pregnant, huge on the couch, pregnant. We got in a huge screaming match, and he still chose to go to the bar. And I was like, do not leave me right now. Do not leave me. But he needed space. I needed him to stay. That memory last night, I was like, dang, my kid is almost 14. And this was a trauma that was wired, still wired into my system that got triggered this last week for nothing related to it. So my
Yeah.
physical body tried to send me down this rabbit hole. And then what happens? We go to our new partner, and what do? We pick, we fight, we argue about things because our mind has created a story of what the current is doing, but it's really because it's trying to protect you from the past that hurt. And that's
100%.
it's one of the
100%.
it's one of the gifts though of divorce you get because it's hard work and it does keep coming up, but it moved through very quickly. I could stay detached from it. But the lesson was I will never let my current relationship get that bad again.
Yeah. Well, I think you go into it with a completely different perspective, and I think that's why so many people that I know and I speak to in real life or through social media, they are in such healthy second relationships and marriages because everything that they were able to process that they did wrong or that didn't feel right to them that the other person did wrong, you do not accept those things anymore. Whereas I think the first time around, especially if you have a child and you're scared of that divorce thing, you start to kind of rationalize things to yourself that, oh, it's okay. This will change because of XYZ, or once we get over this hump, this will be okay. And the fact is that you should not have to bargain with your relationship. And that doesn't mean there's not compromise, but I think being in a healthy relationship now where there's healthy communication, there is adoration, there is love, there is respect, there is partnership, sitting in that space and then looking at my old life, I don't even feel like it's my life. I feel like I've completely disassociated from it. But that being said, some people don't understand that that doesn't mean the triggers go away. So everything you're saying, I feel that so hard because it's true. And I used to get triggers like when my text would go off, right? Or my email would ding, or I had to open my email. I would literally get nauseous. I would get that cold sweat. I would dread it. I would have to, I literally could not cope. And I remember having a conversation in therapy about those triggers and how I was so upset that it affected me and I felt weak. And she said the same thing you just said, that it's not weakness, it's you protecting yourself. Like it's a protection mechanism because you're not fully over that trigger. And so it's coming in and you're reconciling your old life with your new life, trying to figure it out. And we had this whole conversation about weakness and vulnerability and strength and how they're all so intrinsically tied to each other. And I will never forget, my therapist said to me, when there's a storm and everything's going crazy, and I live in Florida where there's hurricanes, and so this is why we were talking about this, and she was like, you look at these big strong oak trees, right, these giant oak trees, and they are the first ones to fall because there's zero flexibility when they're going through the storm, so they just get hit and they're down. But you look at the palm trees that are skinny and they look weak and they look frail, and they just kind of like blow with it. They blow with the storm and they take it. They take the hits, and then they're still standing at the end. And maybe they're a little bent, maybe they're a little broken, but they're still standing. And I was so moved by that example that I went out and I got a palm tree tattoo on my wrist that's a little bit bent and a little bit imperfect, because I wanted to remind myself that, like, all these times where I feel weakness from those triggers that come in, I went through a lot. I went through the ringer. And if that's what I have left of all of it, I will deal with it and I will conquer it and I'll focus on it. But it's really easy to fall back into those dark places when those triggers arise because you're conditioned to do it, right? You spent so much time in a relationship where when those things would happen, you would mentally go to a different place. And now you have to literally rewire your brain. And it's not easy, but it does happen. It takes time. You see a major difference if you put the work in and you're honest with yourself.
Yeah, it's little tiny shifts, looking at those belief systems, right?
Hmm.
And when you are able to just reach for a better feeling thought, just soften it just a little bit, this is where the magic starts to happen. And so the good days become better and it lasts longer in between the triggers. And everything starts to finally feel like it's moving forward a little bit. You also will have learned how to understand the signals your body is giving you. You know, those things hit. Like when my system goes, "Ah," and the alarms start going off, I can now go through my own self reflection and be like, okay, hold on. Is this a real threat that's happening right now? Is this an old threat? What's the old memory that's surfacing? And then you know what? Most times I need to be told that it
You're
sucked.
safe.
Back then,
Yeah.
it sucked. Guess what?
Hmm.
That fucking hurt. That's what I was telling myself last night. I was like, "Yeah, that fucking hurt." And that was
Yep.
not fair, and it was not cool, and you are not there anymore. That
Hmm.
is not happening to you now. And so then you're like, "Oh, you become the person who heals you. You become the person who picks you up. You are no longer reliant on somebody else to bring you the flowers or to help you feel better. You learn that you have your own inner guidance system and that you can trust it again." And it is just those little steps every single day. If you've been struggling to find the right support to help you figure out what your next step is, the club is your answer. Launching this summer, we'll be hosting a private divorce group for you to get the support, the inspiration, and the guidance you need to be able to find the answers for you to finally move forward. No matter if you are unhappily married, trying to figure out what those next steps are, or in those early phases of separation and divorce where it feels like a constant uphill battle and you just want to get your feet underneath you, the club is going to be your place. Every single month, I offer support calls, networking calls to meet other women, and a signature program to guide you from confusion to clarity. On top of that, my most favorite part is every quarter, I'm going to send you a healing gift. You get a kit full of tools, support items, things to help you on your healing journey. The club is going to open up this summer, so make sure to get on the wait list. The link is in the show notes so that you have early access.
It's so true. I mean, it changes everything. It really, I have zero regrets. It sucked. It's messy. Sometimes it's still messy, but I have such a beautiful life void of having to live in such terrifying and terrible and dark moments that I accepted as normal for so long. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't get mad at myself sometimes. Like sometimes I think about things that I endured when those triggers happen and I get angry at myself for allowing it to happen. And then I have to remind myself, you were in a different place. You were in survival mode emotionally and you were trying to just figure out what your next move was going to be. And you have to give yourself grace. And I think that what a lot of women, including myself, and I'm sure you experienced as well, is that when you take that first breath from the other side, right? When you get up from the fetal position on your closet floor of your first home where you're now a single person. I mean, I never lived alone. I went from my parents' house to living with a boyfriend who became my husband. And so I, aside from college, living with roommates, I never had the experience of living in my own space ever. And so while I should have been jumping for joy when I lived in that little post divorce, condo, I spent the first night on the floor in the fetal position because I couldn't believe what I did. I couldn't believe that this was now my life. And I think once you emerge from that and you stop with that pity party we talked about and you get up and you start to take control of your life and what you want and how you handle yourself, everything changes, including the way that people treat you. I think when you go through a divorce, there's so much pity and there's so much shame, and there's people saying, I'm sorry all the time. Stop saying I'm sorry, because when you tell someone you're sorry, I understand it's coming from a good place, but as someone who's going through it, you're making, at least, I'm not going to speak for other people. It made me feel like I was doing something wrong. When people would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," I'd be like, "Oh, why are they sorry? Should I not be doing this?" And I think that we have to be so careful with our words, because when you send that message to someone who's doing maybe one of the hardest things in their life, they don't want to feel sorry. They want to feel strong. They want to feel supported. They want to feel like there are people rooting for them and cheering for them, not people mourning that relationship. They want people to be like, good for you for getting out if you felt like that was the right thing for you. And I support you in whatever the rest of your life looks like. Think we need more of that than people, you know, handling others with kid gloves and being so sorry for being divorced. I don't ever want someone to be sorry for me. It was the best thing I did for myself. It really, really was.
Yeah, I think I look at it I don't know where I land on this one because I think I look at it in, okay, black and white. Yes, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think I still reflect on, I'm sad that it got so bad. I'm sad that I didn't see it sooner. When my son was little, like, newborn baby, my dad dies of pancreatic cancer. My sister gets married. Like, we're talking all in 6 months. You got all the
Mm.
things. My hair's falling out from having a baby. Like, everything has hit the fan. And so there was so much pain and there was so much to hold on to. And I had already, at that point, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong.
Mhm.
And then I fought my way back into it. Like I fought my
Yeah,
way
you
back
convince
into
yourself, because you convince yourself you can fix it.
yes. And that's the thing because the women who are part of the Crazy Ex-Wives Club, we feel crazy because we loved that deeply. And we
Mhm.
loved that fiercely, so fiercely that we abandoned ourselves for the hope of loving the marriage into something that the other person wasn't willing to contribute to. And that to me has been the hardest part, that
Mhm.
self-forgiveness. Like, why did I allow somebody to treat me like that? Why was I so afraid to start over? And that is the thing. If you're sitting there and you're like, I just don't know if I can do it, you can, and it is one step at a time because Rachel and I both felt that way too. I did
Mhm.
not understand. And you guys, I was making a good salary. I had lived on my own before. I had rented my own places, bought my own place. Like I was not reliant on somebody else. And I still struggled to be able to say, yeah, divorce is going to be a part of my story. I quote unquote failed at what it means to be married. And that isn't
Mhm.
what it means.
It's a hard pill to swallow when you think of it that way. Yeah.
It is, right? Because I fought, I tried, I did the therapy, I bought the books, I tried to get him to go to therapy. My failed marriage was not me failing. It
Right.
takes two people. And if that other person in your life is unwilling to show up and get uncomfortable, this is a
Mhm.
fucking deep, close relationship. If they're not going to get uncomfortable with you and look at their feelings and have the conversations, and guess what? They don't have to cry in front of you. They don't have to tell you all the things, but they do need to find somebody to help them through it because they
Totally.
cannot continue to dump that shit on you and then you
No,
take it
no.
on.
Yep, and we do, because you just get you again, it's a pattern, it's a routine, so you get used to doing it until you, and breaking habits and patterns and routines is really hard when you've been living it for such a long time. And I think for me also, one of the biggest surprises was that, I was so secretive about it. I didn't tell anyone
Yeah.
that it was happening until the end, because I was so scared and so ashamed and so embarrassed and all these things I shouldn't have felt. So stupid. I'm mad at myself for feeling like that, even though it's not productive, because again, you don't see it till you're on the other side. I would never have what I have now if I stayed in that situation. I would have continued to be a shell of myself. I would have not been thriving. I would have not functioned. I would have not been a good example of a strong woman for my daughter. Like there's just so many things tied to it that didn't make it of value. But one of the most surprising things to me was that when I told people, they were just like, "Oh, thank God. Like you weren't yourself. You were like a captor, like someone in captivity. Like you were like so timid and censored and all these things." And I never really saw that. I just kind of was like going through the motions, and people would be like, "You lost your spirit, you lost your moxie, you lost all these things." And it wasn't until I started to hear that from people from so many different corners of my life that I was like, all this time I was trying to hide it and everybody saw it because people are not stupid. They pick up on cues. And it's the same thing now. I'm sure you see, right? Having gone through a divorce, how many times have you opened social media and you see a friend on Facebook and they're either overly praising their husband, right? They're like, "Oh, the love of my life, blah, blah, blah," which I'm not, I have done that too with my husband, but like, it's a fine line. So you see those kind of posts, and as someone gone through divorce, you're like, "Oh, they're in it. They are in it." Or you see someone who has not posted their partner in months and they're living their best life, and you're like, "They're separated." When you see those things because you lived it and you kind of live those same lies and facades, it's really interesting on the outside when you see it in real life and you're like, "Oh my God, that's what I did. That is totally what I did." And no wonder people were like, "The jig is up," you know?
Yeah. No, I remember my ex had made a post about, like, Easter. About, like, "I'm spending Easter with the family, I love my family, blah, blah, blah," and then I found snaps between him and the other woman that night, and I'm
It's
like,
crazy.
"What? How do you post online about your loving family and then message another woman about how much you love her?" Like, the things that happen, that's a whole 'nother show, you guys, but
I know, I know.
the right? I was like, "Where
Yep.
how do we bring this back and tie this up with a bow?" But it's that right? When something is real, the social media, the stories, the whatever, it doesn't matter. And when something is real, it doesn't mean that it's perfect all the time. And I think that is the hardest part about making the decision that divorce is the option, because gradually, then suddenly, it didn't start out the way it
Mm-mm,
ended. It was
mm-mm.
probably really good. It probably felt really good. And little by little, things were eroded. Trust was eroded. Resentment was building. These pieces built over time until where you end looks nothing like where you began. And
Mhm.
nobody expected that, and that's where I will put the thing out there that for a lot of cases, I mean, can you save it in the 11th hour? You can. It's a lot of work for both people. And so
And maybe that's temporary. Maybe you're saving it for the moment and you're ready to come to an agreement. But if there are things that aren't fixed and fractures that are so large that you can't see past them, it's like you're putting little band-aids on everything. And maybe you'll, coexist. And only you know in your heart too if
yes.
it's fixable. I think that some people genuinely they know that there are things that can be fixed. And I think it's amazing they go to therapy, they work through it. And I've seen couples do that many times. But I also think that if you're lying to yourself. You know in your gut
Mhm.
if this is something that is going to change or if you have to compromise everything you are to stay in something that is broken. And when that is the case, when it's the latter, I think you really have to have a hard conversation with yourself and ask if this is how you want to live the rest of your life.
Yeah, and you said couples work through it. It's not one person, you guys. You
Right.
can't do it on your own. And so if you're
Right.
sitting in a place where you really are doing it on your own, here's your homework for our episode. Grab your journal and sit down and reflect and ask yourself, what is the biggest thing that is holding you back from knowing that divorce is your next step? Is
Mhm.
it fear? I'm afraid. I'm afraid of how I'm going to figure it out. I'm afraid of what it's going to do to my kids. I'm afraid if I'm making the right choice. If fear is the thing that comes up first for you, I am telling you that is not your inner guidance. That is not your brain or heart or any part of you deciding. That is that fear monster that hacks our nervous system, puts our senses on edge, and tries to keep us small because it is afraid of the unknown. One of my favorite quotes: fear and excitement feel the same way. The only difference is one is you are trusting in what's around the corner. And so if fear is what is holding you back, what if I told you all of those fears you will be able to figure out? You will have an answer for how to help your kids through it. You will have an answer for how to pay for it. You will have an answer for how to move forward. If all those
Mhm.
fears are removed, would you still want to stay?
And I wanna just say something really quick. I know we're ending, but I wanna say something about the fear with the kids because not only did I go through a divorce with a 2-year-old at the time, but I'm also my parents got divorced. It's really amazing to me, and it took me also coming out of divorce to think like this. I thought like everyone else, going in, if one of your biggest fears is that you're afraid how it's gonna affect your children when you get divorced, I want to urge you to also flip the script a little bit and spend more time being fearful of what it will look like if you stay in a really bad situation and your kids watch that as your example of marriage, because that is what they will find comfort in the chaos of the fighting and the acrimony. And even if you're not fighting and you're giving each other the silent treatment, kids pick up on tone and mood, and you have a responsibility as a parent to show your children healthy relationships so that as they start to embark on dating, they don't make some of those same mistakes. So I just urge all women who are holding on to that, and men who are holding on to that fear of what's going to happen to your kids, please consider the other side of what happens to them if you stay in this and what that looks like for them. Because I think that is equally, if not more important, when you are seriously considering this.
Yeah, it isn't the divorce that is the deciding factor on whether or not your child is affected for the rest of their life. It is the ongoing conflict. So whether you stay married and there's ongoing conflict or you divorce and there's ongoing conflict, it is that living in that constant state of reacting to the chaos that's happening that creates more damage. They will like to try and freak you out that, oh, divorce is going to ruin your kid. God, when the men haters roll in on social media and start calling me all the names and saying how much I ruined my child, my sweet 13-year-old. Sometimes it gets to be too much. And sometimes I have shared, like, hey, it's just really heavy right now. There's a lot of hate rolling in. And I go, primarily, they think I ruined your life. And he's like, what are they talking about? Like, he gets so worked up and he's like, I want to respond to them. And I'm like, you're not allowed to respond to them, but that's really sweet. And I'm glad to hear that, like, you made it through. He had a journey too. It was not always easy. My son was 4. I think that the younger they are, the easier it just becomes is the new normal. So when you think, oh, when they're teenagers, when they're in high school, when they leave the house, then it'll be easier. I've seen more college age kids choose to stop speaking to their parents because of divorce than young kids. They had a harder time understanding and processing it. We had rough years. We did therapy to figure out how to get through the anger and the tears and the frustration and the things he was feeling. And he's now in a place where it's normal and it's good. He has extra holidays or extra vacations. And is there some added things that made him grow up faster? Absolutely. Is there some added time of aloneness because he's an only child? Absolutely. And it's part of his story too. So we have to remember that every little being shows up at the perfect place for what they're trying to learn in this life. And so I want to thank you guys for being on the journey with us. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing your story and so many insights in there.
Oh, thank you. I love it. And I love the support that you're providing to people who really, truly need to hear some of these things so that they're not so scared of getting over to the other side. It's really nice over here. It really, really is nice over here.
Yeah, you guys, there's a beauty to it, right? That bittersweetness sometimes. Like I
Mhm.
hate what I had to go through and I love how it made me who I am today. So
Perfect way to say it. Perfect ending, cherry on top.
right? Put that cherry there. We're going to sign off for today. You guys had some journal prompts. You had some things to think through. Again, if you are looking for that community space, come join the club. That is the whole point. Sometimes we just need people who understand what we're going through. You guys can learn more about Rachel in the show notes as well as on the Crazy Ex-Wives Club under episodes. I've got all of her handles so you can follow her, you can sign up, you can read her blogs, all of that great information. Thank you again, Rachel. And until next week, you guys take care, give yourself some added grace, and find some time to clear that fear. And that's it. Another great episode of the Crazy Ex-Wives Club, a podcast for women learning how to heal from their divorce. Tune in next week for more advice and tips to help you figure out life after divorce. And until then, give yourself grace, do the best you can, and know that this is all part of the process.